Hi, so we're back here again. I've got Ed here with me, and just to recap, Ed, you are a language tutor. You tutor people in English, Afrikaans, Japanese, and occasionally Mandarin Chinese.
That's right.
And you like to learn, along with the more commonly learnt languages, as you put that yesterday, the default languages. I'm going to use that. I like that.
Yeah.
You also like to learn the less default languages as well.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about today. And yesterday you said one of the main things that attracts you to learning these languages is a sort of way to explore parts of the world that we don't often get to see on TV, and we don't get to hear about as much.
Yes. That's right.
And we said some of the cons were, well, the major con is finding resources, so the lack of resources and particularly good ones. But then we also said that actually that can be a plus because you have to create your own resources, and then you end up creating things that are more suited to you and your interests, and you don't get to hide behind the books as much, and you start speaking sooner and connecting with people sooner as well.
Yeah, the downside to that is if you don't have any experience and you don't know how to learn a language and you haven't done it before, then it's obviously much harder. Yeah. Because when you're starting out, you have no idea what you need to do, how you need to learn, and it seems like this very daunting task. So that's the downside. So I suppose because I've been through the process before, it's not such a bad thing because I know how to create resources because I've done it before, and I know what to learn and what to study. But then it's not such a big deal because if somebody just tells you, you also know. It's not like you have to figure it out on your own. If somebody just lets you know, you could just do this, then you would know it. So I think it's useful to seek help from others who have been through the process before. And if you do that, then these less popular languages won't be so tough.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think people like the polyglot Lupo Lampriello, he's very good at teaching people how to learn languages. So if you've got somebody like that, or somebody like yourself that has experience in how to learn languages, they can coach you along the process as well.
Yeah, it's almost the art in of itself, the actual learning of the language, aside from learning the language, knowing how to learn. I used to dismiss those kinds of things when I was younger. I used to think, well, the subject is important. If it's mathematics, that's what's important, or whatever it is. But actually, now I disagree with that view. I think it's actually very important to have methods and to know how to learn and to study how to study. Or to study how to learn, and I think because with language learning, there's so much to do, and it's useful to be able to channel that in a certain direction and use a certain way. And so I frequently view a lot of those polyglot videos. Luca Richardson-Cott is another one. Vinny the Irish Polyglot. There's a lot of different people out there, and they all have very useful tips. And if you just take things that they say and apply some of them, even if you don't apply everything, just some of it, you'll find that it streamlines the work a lot better. So
and I think it's important to know yourself as a learner as well. And I've always said this because some people will learn much better through visual aids, and other people through auditory and things like that.
And there's smart methods, and then there's what I call brute force. And I tend to prefer the brute force, but I don't necessarily dismiss the smart methods. So for somebody who doesn't know, the smart methods is something like mnemonics, where you come up with a story. So you might want to learn a certain word, and it has a certain sound. And I mean, I'm reminded of I had a student just recently who's learning Japanese, and he likes to use mnemonics. But he's using I'm teaching him with the Pimsleur method, which doesn't really use mnemonics. It's just it's the brute force method. But he likes to add mnemonics to it. And there's a word in Japanese which means posture or attitude, and the word is shisei. And he came up with this great mnemonic where she says, "Say what? You got attitude," or something along those lines. He doesn't forget it now. So there's a lot of smart methods which you can use. I'm not such a fan of them because I find they take a lot of work and I'm lazy. Because you have to come up with a story, and Um, it doesn't really have to be a great story, because the more ridiculous it is, the easier it is to remember, because you end up remembering it because it's funny or because it's ridiculous, whatever it is. But I just always find I'm just too lazy to come up with a story for every word, and I'm always in a rush. I want to learn everything as quickly as possible,
Yeah.
so I prefer to just repeat it a lot of times, because I can do that fast and it's easy and it doesn't require a lot of work. It might be boring though, but I'm always so excited that I know I'm going to learn it fast that I just do it anyway.
Yeah.
But smart methods might be more interesting to some people, and other people might dread having to try and use a kind of a brute force hard memorization method. But I think there's a mix as well. I sometimes use mnemonics for certain things. If it's very hard, if I just can't get it again and again, I might have used it at some point in the past, but rarely.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard about mnemonics was from Benny, the Irish polyglot, and he explained it, and I thought, same as you, oh, this is going to take forever, and I can't possibly do this for every single word, and I still don't do it for every single word. But if there's a word I'm having problems with, like biscuit bar in Afrikaans, I had such problems with that word. And it reminded me of biscuit bar. So now I picture a biscuit, a bar full of biscuits that's available for everybody to take.
That's another thing. It can be a visual mnemonic as well. You see, I never took stuff like that into account, but mnemonics, it can be anything. It can be purely based on sound. It can be purely based on meaning, or it can be visual.
Yeah.
If you visualize, or it can be a combination of all of those. If you come up with a really good story that matches it all together. I'll even skim over the grammar, because I have found that, in my opinion, people when they try and study a language, do it backwards from how you should actually do it. So most people, what they assume is, I need to study the grammar, I need to know the rules, and then I need to get vocabulary, or I need to get vocabulary in tandem with studying the grammar. And then I need to, then I can kind of understand the language. Whereas I have found understanding only comes after you've kind of memorized parts of the grammar, the structure, but not necessarily knowing the rules. So I'll tell you about my strategy for Serbian. What I'm doing with Serbian is I'm going through this book, right, Colloquial Serbian, which is a great book, by the way, and I'm listening to the audio, and then I'm kind of repeating it and trying to memorize it, all dialogues. And I'm memorizing the words as well individually. But while I'm doing that, I won't worry so much about whether or not I actually already know the words before I start to memorize the dialogues. And then if I don't know the word, I'll just learn it with the dialogue. But I'll just hard memorize the whole thing. And then later on, I'll start to differentiate. And I'm all right with that. And I find that's how it happens more often than not, rather than trying to know each word before I tackle the whole dialogue. And I think the same thing happened in Japanese. I was doing words and sentences at the same time, just hard memorizing them. And I found I was speaking quicker later on, because I would kind of, it's almost like you're reverse engineering the language. Rather than building up to it, you're just taking it all in at once, memorizing it, and then you break it down later on. And that might seem a lot harder and a lot less intuitive, but I think it's actually what is happening when you learn a language either way, because it's impossible for you to understand everything, before you get used to it, if you will.
Definitely.
Where it's better to get used to it and then understand.
I found that with the Afrikaans, and I find because there wasn't as many like resources out there for me to use, I didn't get stuck learning the grammar like I have with the French. So I've actually had to use the language, and I've had a feel for the language. And then I've been thinking, well, why do you sometimes put is at the end of the sentence, and why do we sometimes say hey is or is hey and things like that? And then because I'm interested in it and I can think of it in the context of the sentence or the dialogue, then it's been much easier for me to, more interesting for me to then go and look at the grammar behind it.
Right, it occurs to you afterwards, not before, right? Yeah. And I've had the exact same experience with every language I've studied. It's always occurred to me afterwards, oh, that's what this means, or that's why we did this. So I'm just going to memorize the whole sentence and use it with people, as long as I know how to use it. So I know let's say I want to say a certain phrase, like I want to say, studying is hard. I want to know that phrase. I'll just memorize the whole phrase and I'll keep using it everywhere. I'll use it with everybody. I'll tell them studying is hard, even when I don't need to, even when it makes no sense. I'll just go and I'll tell a person that so that I'm using it. And then it occurs to me afterwards, that's what that one particle means. So that's what that one piece means. You kind of figure it out after you've learned it. Whereas most people assume, because logically it makes sense, when you study a language, that you need to figure the language out and then use it.
Yeah.
Not use it and then figure it out. But that's in actuality how it ends up working. And so I think that's where a lot of people stress when it comes to language. They're like, I got to figure this out. I got to know how to speak. You can actually, it's counterintuitive, but you just mimic the language and use it. And in the beginning, it's true. You are like a parrot. You're just, I'm just repeating things back at this point. And so I know what I'm saying because I've seen the translation, but I don't actually have an idea of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I'll repeat it back. But that's fine because later on I will understand it, and sooner than later on. So I think the whole thing about studying out of a book and trying to understand the language and know what you're doing before you speak, that's, if it's possible at all, I think it's very hard.
I think there's some people that love, they love the grammar side of it and they want to know the mechanics of it and how it works. But I think for the majority of people that want to learn a language because they want to communicate and because they want to speak, I think that can hold you back quite a lot. And I think with the smaller languages, because there's not as many resources, you've got to seek people out to help you learn. And quite often you are learning from natives because there's not as many people outside of South Africa or Namibia who are teaching Afrikaans. So all of my Afrikaans tutors, you are all native speakers. I think you get the language more naturally, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think as far as the whole grammar method goes, you'll find a lot of very advanced polyglots or advanced language learners actually using the grammar method. But that's only because they've probably encountered enough languages with enough different grammars. So a lot of advanced people are able to use the grammar method in addition to maybe being interested in it, because they have the experience of having encountered other grammars, and if they know that, they can just slot in the new one into what their old framework is. Whereas if you're new to it, or perhaps you just don't enjoy it, it's not so quick to do that because it'll actually take you longer to figure everything out. But if you've studied 10 languages with 10 different grammars, or there are only a handful of different grammars out there. I don't know how many, but I'm sure it's not that many. But if you've studied enough languages to have encountered, all of the major varieties, then you come up to a new language and you just take a quick look at the grammar, and you'll already have an understanding of how it's going to work just by having looked at how it works. And so then, you can apply that. I think it's still probably pretty unpleasant, but it explains how some people can use the grammar method and be very successful.
I wonder if when you learn a language that's not as commonly taught, I wonder if it's better to learn that as after you've learned a few other languages, like you say, because then you get to know yourself as a learner, you get to know the mechanics of learning a language. So it might be harder if you've never learned a foreign language before to start with a less common language.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, I've heard that point many times. I think for me, the biggest problem is always whether or not I'm interested in it, because
me too.
I have convinced myself in the past. In the past, I've convinced myself that I'm interested in a certain language when I was curious about it, but I wouldn't say I was really interested in it. And then I start studying it, and I don't know what's wrong. I don't advance, and I don't study that often. And I'm trying my best to do it, but then I can't figure out what's going on. I'm like, why am I struggling so much? And then after a while, I figure out I'm not really that into it. I'm kind of forcing the issue. And then, so that's one big thing for me. That's in my opinion, the only real requirement that you must have if you want to study foreign language. Anybody can do it, but you must be interested, because there's just too much to learn and too much work to do if you're not interested. Yeah, I think it's just the less popular language is obviously a bigger intellectual challenge. Yeah, and I think most people who give up when it comes to language learning, myself included, because I've given up on languages, some languages I've studied. And I think most people, you don't quite say, okay, no, I've had enough, I'm just not going to do this. You just delay it constantly.
Yeah.
And that's equal to giving it up. So, you're just like, oh, I'll get to it. And then years go by and you never study.
And that's something with the smaller languages as well. Now we've got the internet and you can buy things from abroad quite easily.
Yeah.
With me, obviously, it's quite easy because we go to South Africa. So I brought this when I was in South Africa, which you can't get in England. And I brought this, which is apparently what they're doing in the schools in South Africa. This, which I got from my sister-in-law.
And wait, is she in South Africa? Or?
Yeah, she is. This was her book from when she was at school. But yeah, you can, even if you can't find the resources in your own country, you can order things from overseas, or if you're visiting the country, you can pick things up when you're over there as well.
Flashcards are brilliant. Anki is a lifesaver for me. I'm using it now for Serbian as well. It was very hard making the Serbian ones because, as I explained to you, I had to type in every word out of glossary into Forvo to find the pronunciation, which I could then download to put it in my flashcard. But luckily, that's all done now. And since it's done, I can just use my flashcards, and it'll figure things out for me. It'll figure out when I'm going to forget them, when I should see them again, if I should see them again. And it's much easier to learn this way.
Anki's good, actually. For anyone that doesn't know that, it's an online program, isn't it? And I used to have the app on my phone.
You can download it. So you just go onto the website and you download it. And then it doesn't come with any flashcards. You have to either make your own flashcards, or there's a great repository online of flashcards. Yeah, I think you might be able to share a link to that.
Yeah,
and
I will
do. It's not even a language thing. There's law, there's biology cards, there's school cards, there's geography, which is great. I've sometimes used one of those. That's a great tip I have for anybody studying languages. Try and study the geography. So when I was learning Japanese, I would learn, so in Japan they don't call them provinces, they call them prefectures for some reason. But it's basically just provinces.
Yeah.
And I think there's 47 of them. And because they're very small. And I learned the Japanese word for all of them, and the names and the kanjis. And the reason I do that is because as soon as I meet somebody from a particular city, that immediately gives me a topic to talk about with them. So if you struggle to speak with somebody, build up this knowledge of things you can talk about, either things in the culture or in the geography or whatever it is. And so now every time I study a language, I'll actually take the provinces, I'll learn the names, I'll learn the capitals, so that I know what is.
Yeah.
And then one of the first things I'll ask somebody is where they're from. And as soon as they tell me, I might know a particular fact about that town, or I might know something about the history, or I might just know where it is. And then immediately I know there's something I can grab onto to speak about if I can't come up with anything else. And besides, it's just good for showing off, because they'll be like, wow, you not only speak, you know where everything is. You're like, yeah. So it's useful for that. I think it's worth pointing out a lot of the lesser learned languages are still studied a lot more than, say, some of the languages in Africa or in certainly in the Americas, where a lot of the languages are very, like the native languages.
Yeah.
So like Serbian, it's worth pointing out, is not necessarily an understudy. It doesn't compare to Spanish, of course, but still the European languages are very popular when you compare it to the African languages. That is still a big problem. If you're interested in those, I still think it is very hard to learn those, but I think the general trend is you'll find Serbian, Czech, a lot of these lesser studied languages still have very good resources, because there is a lot of people, after you take French, after Spanish, there's a lot of people studying them. I think it's an economic thing as well, isn't it? People study the languages, which is going to give them the greatest amount of culture and economic opportunity. And so people are kind of less interested in studying languages from the Amazon, because your actual chance of going to the Amazon and being able to speak it and continuously speak it is quite limited. You might just be a language buff and you might be interested in it, but your real world return on investment, if you will, is going to be, maybe you can go camping for 2 weeks there and speak, but after that you're going to be incredibly bored and you're going to have to come back. Whereas you can go and live in the Czech Republic, so that's much different.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just wanted to point out that Serbian, there's still a lot of resources for that when you compare against those really understudied languages. But of course, it doesn't usually compare to Russian, Spanish, French, Chinese. I mean, the resources for that is just endless.
Yeah, I think it's maybe that they're not as advertised, because I found that with the Afrikaans, although there's not as many as there is with French, where I am in England, when I actually search for them, there is quite a lot out there.
Really?
When you actually look for it, but you've got to know where to look, and you've got to be proactive,
right. And you've got to search for them. It's easy to find the French stuff because it's just everywhere.
Yeah.
I think Afrikaans is an example of a language where you still have fairly good resources, not a lot, but good ones. So you have two main textbooks, I think, and probably a couple of others. Whereas if you take Serbian is a level up from Afrikaans up in popularity. There is still a lot of different textbooks, but like you said, you got to know where to go and find them. They're not going to jump out at you. Yeah, so that certainly is true.
I quite like learning a language that isn't so popular in England as well, because everybody thinks you're quite exotic.
I can imagine, yeah. I've had that a lot with the Japanese. I enjoyed the myth that it's hard. It's really not hard at all. It might be hard to read, I'll admit to that. But especially as a beginner. But speaking is actually very simple, and the grammar is not that complicated. But everybody is convinced to death that it's the hardest language in the world, or that it's one of the hardest. And I just let the myth stew because I enjoy it. They'll be like, "Wow, you must be very intelligent and smart." I'm like, "Well, I try. I wouldn't necessarily dispel it." So it's a bit of showing off, isn't it?
Definitely, because everyone says that with the Afrikaans. Say, "Well, you must be so intelligent to learn a language like that." And I'm thinking, "Well, I'm not gonna tell it to you, but for an English speaker, it's actually quite easy."
Exactly. Yeah, I know. It's quite funny. It's interesting how many different elements there are, isn't it? There's no kind of black and white in language learning. There's a lot of different things that come into account.
Yeah, definitely so.
And it's kind of a tragedy, but the exoticness and the alienness of it diminishes over time, and then it almost seems normal. Yeah, like Japanese was this exotic language to me in the beginning, and now it's just like it feels like everybody should know it. You know what I mean? I'm like, you don't know Japanese? Why? It just feels so normal to me, and as a result, I'm much less interested in Japan now than I was before. But I suspect it's just you get used to it, and then you need to be away from it for a while, and then it becomes exotic again. Yeah, sometimes I remind myself I can speak Japanese if I haven't done it in a very long time, or I go there, which I'm going to be doing next month. And I suspect when I go there next month, it'll reignite that flame, and I'll be reminded again of what it all is. It'll seem just as exotic as it was before. But yeah, I think that's also why I study other languages, because it diminishes over time my interest in the one. Then I go to the other one and it seems exotic in here again. Then that becomes normal. Then I go back to the other one and it seems exotic again. And I go to a new one and that's exotic. So yeah, Kelly, I'm afraid we are running out of time again.
No,
I will have to get to my next lesson. But I think we could just go on speaking about this forever because there's so much to say about it. Yeah, which is why we keep running out of time. But yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you, Ed. Thank you so much. And I'll link, if you're happy for me to, your italki tutor profile, so anyone can contact you if they're interested in learning the languages.
That. Thank you very much.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you.
Don't be asleep like this guy. Be like this guy and open your eyes to fun language learning. For more great stuff, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. You can connect to Ed at italki.com/edosensei. You can email me at kelly@fruitfulfunfluent.com. If you would like a free consultation with myself on how to make language learning more fun, just follow the link in the description. Okay, that's everything for now. Remember to have fun in everything you do and make sure to be nice to other people. Bye for now.